We're here again with the podcast of the Monday Night Footballers, and we've got a special program today. We're going to talk about the Chiefs, but right now, we're going to talk to Trevor Powell, who's a youngster by our age. And of course, all of us are octogenarians, have been meeting now since 1970 when the Monday Night Football telecast began. So we've got a lot of age and a lot of mileage and a lot of wrinkles, to prove that we're out of touch. So we're trying to bridge the intergenerational gap. And we've got Trevor here today who's just even 35. Is that right, Trevor?
33.
33. I keep trying to add more onto it. And that's only because of the fact that we really are getting into this part of life where we want to hand off what we know about the world and sports to the next generation. Now, there's a little bit of expertise kind of in that statement because it also happens as far as family matters and racial matters, and it may even be the answer to problems that we're having, that we have not done a good job of handing off what we know to the next generation. And all of us Monday Night Footballers are octogenarians now, and that just simply means that we're 80 or above. And we've had a tough time. We were right on the cusp of Jim Crowism. And if you don't know anything about Jim Crowism, you need to look it up because it was the era that extended slavery. Now, they said you wasn't free or that you were free in slavery, but there was a long period called Jim Crowism where they didn't act like we were free or we didn't act like we were free. We acted like we were still enslaved, and that period handed off for an awful long time. And as Trevor and I was talking about the days of the University of Missouri being integrated, and I was in that integration. As a matter of fact, I was in 1960 when I started there, and 1966 when I graduated. But the idea was there was great resistance, especially in borderline schools, about integrating. Now, many of the eastern schools and the northern schools already did, but the Midwestern and the southern schools, universities, were hard to integrate. And by integrate, it meant something at the time, Trevor, that it meant something for you to go to the university because it's kind of like today when the first or something here or there, the first gets to do this. I'll be glad we run out of them damn firsts because, and to me it wasn't about first, it was about how they treated me. And of course, everybody went through the same thing. They had to tell the expression of where they were from and almost try to tell a sad story in order to be accepted. But anyway, today we're going to get into that, and we'll also get into about how the Chiefs are doing, especially since they lost last week. But more importantly, that now the time has come, will the Chiefs really repeat as Super Bowl champions? I don't know. But anyway, we'll talk to that about Trevor. Trevor Powell, how you been doing?
I've been doing all right, man. I definitely appreciate being on this segment.
Well, this is going to be an interesting segment because it means that Monday Night Footballers always try to find some way to meet. And in reality, it's become our job, just to tell the history. And we sit around and reminisce and talk about old times and old places. But one of the things that we haven't done a good job is telling the young men what we went through at that period. And it's kind of like a subject that seems boring, but it sooner or later begins to explain how things got to be like they were. Are you okay with that?
Yes, I am.
All right. And it reminded me that last week when we were meeting up with you and Jason's son, we actually talked a little bit about food and the differences in foods. And us octogenarians were talking about different kinds of food. What kind of foods kind of struck your fancy or at least curiosity?
The chicken back, the uh, the 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 pig feet, the chicken back, the liver.
Yeah, the beef liver,
Yeah, the beef liver, and then I believe it was one more.
brains.
Yeah, the brains, and I have not had either of those.
Yeah,
Either. Very interesting. I dang near can't even imagine even eating it. You know what I'm saying, to a degree, because I just never ate it. So yeah, that there is a difference of time frame and stuff. So, yeah, I agree. There is a difference in there because I haven't had either. I don't even like liver. I can go to Go Chicken Co. and get some liver, and I don't even like that. So I can only imagine.
well, this is beef and pork liver,
Yeah.
because for the most part, any of us born during that times actually didn't eat what the grocery store had. We ate what the packing house had and would throw away. So the chitlins and the beef livers and all that sort of thing were throwaway items that we came to eat, especially brains. I mean, if there was a big famous food called scrambled eggs and brains. And there wasn't no restaurants either. This is the stuff you ate at home
Wow.
to survive. Now, tell us a little bit about what you were thinking when we were having that conversation.
Well, I can't imagine eating no brain. So, as far as what I was thinking, is I just can't imagine eating any of those things. The closest probably would be the liver. I've had I've had a piece of liver before, and I did not like it. But everything else, no, I can't even imagine eating everything else. I don't even like liver, like I said. So the brain and the back and the feet of the chicken and the pig or whatnot. No,
Yeah, Dr.
a
Allen.
brain ain't a chicken brain. Like what? 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 Yeah, I before y'all was having that conversation, I never even heard nothing about nobody eating a chicken's brain. So
Yeah, well, it
full of nutrients.
that's right. Well, they say that the part of the bodies are much enriched with, the thing. I guess the brain would be the most important. So it must have been healthy because our life expectancy began to climb. In Jim Crowism, as a matter of fact, they've said many times that
Wow.
Jim Crowism led to many continued slavery or Jim Crow because they really didn't want to integrate or really didn't want black people to be in this society. They saw us as slaves and they wanted to keep us as slaves. And that's kind of the way it was. And one of the ways to do this was to be the food that we ate. We weren't able to afford many other kind of things. So families just bought these kind of things. In fact, chicken wings was in there too, if you could believe that.
I love chicken wings.
Well, that's one of the things that survived.
I see. Yeah, we love them. We love chicken wings. I know I'll be the first to say I do.
Well, they came out of because chicken wings were kind of like, to us it was kind of like a delicacy. But, chickens itself, we finally learned how to raise. But the one thing you should learn, or at least know, about this intergenerational gap is that gardens were a big thing. It was a big thing for anybody, family growing at that time. Even if you were in the city, in the city, you grew a garden because that was the only way you were going to have what you wanted, but more importantly, be able to eat pretty good food. Otherwise, it was going to be throwaways or rejects from the bigger populations. And so we learned to eat that. But what do you think about the conversation, just having that conversation?
Well, I think it's pretty like complex and like unique that there was a separation in the food in which some people were able to eat or had access to in the food that some people were not. So I think that's pretty that stands out quite a bit to me that was even a conversation during those times.
Kind of like the haves and the have-nots.
Exactly, with food. I could understand materialism or whatnot, but with food, like that's kind of there is a gap in the time there, because that's stuff that I can't even imagine. So
Well, it was really funny that I mentioned before we went on the air here about being in college at that time. And you can imagine what it was like for our late adolescent.
And I have a question for that.
Sure, go ahead.
If you don't mind. Knowing that, because that was the 60s, right? So what was it like? Like, what did you observe as far as like how can I say it? Integration had just begun, right? So based off of what you were able to observe, did you see more blacks that disagreed with integration, or was there more whites that disagreed with integration?
I think it was a
At that
combination of both. But from our point of view, black person's point of view, we were encouraged to integrate because it's still in the proven ground of integration. We have to prove ourselves, and one of the things, at least with college, is you had to prove that you were smart or at least worthy of being able to go to the university. Because in the country itself, there are a lot of people in the country, but only the select few were able to go to college. And so you were kind of like the best of the best, if you must. And so you were encouraged. I remember the president of the NAACP Missouri State NAACP coming to my parents' home and encouraging me to go to the university. I thought that was a little strange because I went to go to an HBCU, like where all the girls were. And but I chose, after pressure, to go to the University of Missouri, which was what's now called a PWI school, and it was kind of tough. But again, back to this food thing. One of the greatest objections from people on campus was the food. I mean, it was just like no seasoning in it and nothing like that. I mean, there's nothing. And so consequently, like people hated it because there was nothing looking forward to going. And there wasn't any churches, any black churches at least at the time.
And you talking about on campus, right?
On campus, okay. Right. Student groups. And of course it was kind of normal for there to be a continuation of your society onto the campus life, or at least have it. So if you've been used to going to sock hop dances or whatever, there was plenty of that kind of stuff going on, or even churches. But there were no black churches represented on the campus. And there we were forced to integrate, or at least forced to integrate or be unhappy, and I chose to be unhappy.
And when you say unhappy, what do you...
lightly socialized. I mean, it was kind of different, but the whole point of Jim Crowism, and I want to get this over to you, is that Jim Crowism was slavery without law. In other words, what they said is that you got to remember, slavery was brought into the law in many states that it was okay to own slaves, but Jim Crowism, once they said, okay, there ain't no more slavery, emancipation, that wasn't the end of slavery. Slavery continued on with us. So in many ways, we are awkward in our relationship with young people like you because we grew up in essentially slave times. And so you don't know anything about that, but just tell me what your favorite TV program was, and I'll tell you what mine was.
Well, I liked I liked the Jamie Foxx show. What else? Let's see.
Okay.
Martin, Jamie Foxx. This was in the 90s, of course. I was born in 92. So let's see what else. I liked the Fresh Prince of Bel Air, Family Matters. The Cosby Show was even though that's before my time. The Cosby Show was cool, pretty cool too. What else? Let me think of one more.
Okay, I get an idea, but they were not for you. Well, I mean, they in our time they were not for us. The TV shows we saw was Little Beaver. Um, yeah, you all know these.
Leave It to Beaver.
Leave It to Beaver was the kind of thing, and there were lots of I Love Lucy kind of shows and whatever. But we saw television introduced to this society. In other words, a lot of us lived in times without TV, and then TV kind of came in pretty strong in the mid '50s or so, up to the '60s. But up until that time, most of us grew up without TVs, or at least people who had TVs were rare. So, television has affected so much of the way we think and feel, that I just want you to know we didn't get no help from TV. And you were talking about, Martin Lawrence and that group coming up. There were the closest we got to it was the late 40s. Growing up, there was one TV show called the Nat King Cole Trio. And he had a famous song out. Many people didn't even know he was a black guy. But he sang White Christmas, or the Christmas song, and he got famous for that, kind of like Mariah Carey today. And but they turned it a TV show, but it was a short-lived TV show because there was people rejected it because they found out that he was a black guy. But anyway, those are the times that we call them the tiptoe Jim Crow areas. We had to tiptoe. We knew we were free, but we didn't know exactly what that meant because everything about it, including the criminal justice system, basically said you ain't free and treated us that way. And our food kind of reflected that, to get back to what we were talking about. So you grew up in Kansas City, right?
Yes.
Okay, now tell us a little bit about you.
Well, I grew up right down here on this end of town, north end of town. I went to school on both sides of the water. I started off going to school on this side of the water over here in Kansas City, Missouri. Then after the 7th grade, I went and moved over to Kansas City, Kansas, and started going to school over there. My mother, her side of the family are from over here in KC Mo, and my daddy's people, my daddy's side, a lot of them are on the Kansas side in Wyandotte County. So just kind of got a mixture of both sides of the water. I went to Kansas State University. I graduated from Wyandotte High School in class of 2011. Then I went to Longview Community College, and then I went to Kansas State University for a year and stayed on campus with the hope or expectation to try out for the men's basketball team and try to get into the mass communication and broadcast and journalism program, but got into some race relations on the campus and got kicked off the campus. I will never forget that. I remember when that happened. I got kicked off the campus and I cried. I was sick in my dorm for like 2 weeks until I had to leave. So I had to leave the campus when that happened.
So do you think you were a victim of Jim Crow?
I mean, if we want to use the Jim Crow term, I guess so. So
yes.
And I guess so.
And that's part of what we've got to convey is that Jim Crow didn't go nowhere. It didn't die. Slavery. They said we were free, and it was equal and whatever. But we've been talking about school integration and whatever ever since. And the criminal justice system seems like it's not changed at all. And so I'm saying that's got to be handed off to you. You got to know that this ain't a new problem.
Right.
I mean, this is kind of like a continuation. So we,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know quite how to handle it, but I do know that we got to talk about it. And that's why that conversation about the food was so interesting,
Mm-hmm.
because it was one of the clear things that we could probably talk about out loud without getting mad or getting hurt, and talk about, but it represented the times. You kind of get that?
Mm-hmm.
And we don't want to say that we got the answer. We just want you to know that it's an ongoing, ever-long fight,
Right.
in this whole thing called race. And if we don't do something about talking about it or handing it off to you, or at least saying that we're in the same boat, we're actually getting further and further apart.
Mm-hmm.
And by that, we shouldn't be, because it's going to take a unified, multi-civilization aspect to it. It's got to be. But anyway, you said you went back and forth to Kansas and Missouri. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
When you were growing up, did you notice Kansas was one of the free states? As a matter of fact, when they were admitted to the Union, I guess you already know this.
No.
They were admitted to the Union. It was 2 states up. Kansas was admitted as a free state, and Missouri was admitted as a slave state. So we've continued the slave notion, and Kansas, by not having slavery, or at least outlawing slavery, had a much more liberal approach to race relations. That's why everybody went to Kansas, and of course, it was a real market right here in the Kansas City area, because it was on the state line, and you could go across the state line and be free and be back in Missouri and be a slave. Isn't that interesting?
Mm-hmm.
It goes way back, way back. And you see slavery, people still had attitudes. And one thing about laws, it takes a long time for a law to show its effect. And like even today, like when I was telling you that I went to University of Missouri in 1960, they still having race problems to this day. And it ain't nothing new. And the same issues are there. The way they treat people, it's just not a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm saying get ready for a long fight. That's what we're really trying to tell you, that it ain't over. It's kind of like a Chiefs game at Pat Mahomes. It ain't over.
Right, man.
But anyway, speaking a little bit about the Chiefs, what do you think about the Chiefs now that they're 5-4? Do you think they're going to pull out of this?
Oh yes, yeah. I think that they're going to continue to progress as far as where the offense is headed or whatnot. I mean, I'm not going to try to predict the future and say, "Oh yeah, we're going to win the Super Bowl," because I don't feel like we have to win it every year. People have become spoiled to think that we have to win, that we should win the Super Bowl every year, but it's not going to work out like that. But I think that we are definitely progressing on the offensive side of the ball. So I think we'll be all right. Yeah.
Well, Charles Allen is one of our older members. As a matter of fact, when this group was put together in 1970, he and a few friends were already kind of meeting together, being longtime supporters of the Chiefs. And I guess to share a little bit of history, one of the reasons we talk about the Chiefs is because we knew the Chiefs when they came to town, and it was a very segregated affair. As a matter of fact, the Chiefs came to town coming mainly from HBCUs, and the society wasn't quite ready for them here. In other words, they had to live and go to church right here in our neighborhood. As a matter of fact, the Chiefs played their football games right at smack dab in our neighborhood.
So a lot of the players that were on the Chiefs back then were from HBCUs?
Exactly. As a matter of fact, there was a guy named Wells who was kind of the broker, or whatever, getting players because they were starting this new league. And that's why people like Harry Seipert is important, because he remembers the days very vividly when players who were not ready for primetime football, they weren't like Joe Namath or any of those, or what's the quarterback name for the Steelers now? Aaron Rodgers. It wasn't that kind of thing. It was kind of like especially in markets like Kansas City or Missouri, the players came from HBCUs, but they weren't accepted, and they had to live in the neighborhood, if you must, rather than live where they could afford to. And it wasn't a matter of money because these players were paid handsomely, great to me. Not quite Patrick Mahomes style, but
250, 500 million.
yeah, that's right. Not quite that lavish. But did you notice that when just speaking of how different the world is, when Patrick Mahomes' house was burglarized, they showed an aerial view of it.
And Kelsey's, right?
And Kelsey's, that's right. And that just shows you kind of like what the difference is in money. But if you're going to go back to the early 1960s when when the new American Football League was created, some of the Kansas City was probably the southernmost team put together. So, and it was also originally a slave state. So, like saying that this segregation and whatever was a long, long time back, and it continues to this day. The players had to go to church with us, go to clubs with us, or whatever, because even though they were celebrated and had money, they still were not white, or Jim Crow was still alive. That's the point I'm saying. And so the Chiefs played their games right up at 22nd and Brooklyn, which was kind of right in this area of 18th and Vine, which is kind of where segregation of black folks were allowed to gather, allowed. And I say allowed, I guess anybody could have if they had the money, but there were vestiges of Jim Crowism and slavery even when the Chiefs started. So all of us guys were around then and actually bought season tickets because in many ways the AFL, and this is what Harry represents, was a breakthrough for socialization or at least a rubber stamp on slavery or Jim Crowism. It was a breakthrough. And so it's kind of like what we thought about when we were going to college way back then. It was kind of like a breakthrough. It was saying we finally going to get free because we're going to be educated, or as it is in football here, we finally are going to have some money, so they'll have to allow us. But that didn't matter. Jim Crowism is still alive and well today. And you've got to know about that because you got to know how we lived so that you can live better. Does that make sense? And that's why we're so interested in our day of talking to young people, is because we want people to know how serious this matter is. It may be sports and you may make a little money, but you're still black. And somehow or another, and it's really that simple. And it seems like this ongoing conversation that we're having, and we want you to write about it in your articles and whatever, because we have been writing about it since 1970. And in a subtle way, we keep sending the message in a very serious note, even though it's sometimes funny, that it ain't over yet. And Jim Crowism is just another extension of slavery, and that ain't over, and we're not over it. And that's why we had to eat them brain sandwiches and whatever that we were talking about that day. So we've been talking here to Trevor Powell, who is an interesting young man, who writes here for The Call. More importantly, we've been trying to bridge the intergenerational gap that we have and pass on that Jim Crowism is alive and well. And even though you may do good or whatever, you ain't going to be treated good. And so we've learned to live with it, but we've made a lot of breakthroughs you ought to know about. But more importantly, you ought to know how to handle it when you get in conflict with the system. And so we want to kind of adopt you if you must. And if you will trade up situations versus today versus yesterday, and hopefully we'll have a good time on this podcast. All right, we've been talking here with the Trevor Powell, who is a part of the Kansas City Call, and we're all part of the Kansas City Call because we both write columns together each week in the Call, usually under the heading of sports. But really, it's about life as a black person, and particularly black males in this society. So we'll be back next week to do it all over again, where we keep talking plain talk about Jim Crow. Take care. Bye-bye.